Hey there, I'm Alex. Today I want to circle back on the video I did a few weeks ago on FaceFusion. The reason I want to do this video is because ever since that video went live, a bunch of people reached out with new information that I didn't know at the time that actually makes things work a lot better. Not only that, but in that time, I've spoken to a developer and there's been new additions that will actually make it more viable for us in VFX if it's something you're interested in. The other thing I want to wrap up with this video with is I've set up a Nuke template and I'm going to show you how you can grab your output from FaceFusion and then, let's say properly comp it so that it's something that's substantially better than just the raw output you get from FaceFusion. All right, so right off the top, I wanted to do a bit of housekeeping in terms of what I covered last time in the video. The first thing I want to make sure I tell you is that the GitHub page that I was sharing on my original video was actually not the official FaceFusion project. It was actually a fork. However, I was using the Pinocchio one, so the Pinocchio one was the original one. But just know that if you were using the project that I was linking originally, that was probably not the one you wanted to be using. So I've ever since updated the link on the old video, and I'm going to be providing again the link here today. So this is the FaceFusion official GitHub that you want to actually grab it from if you're not going to be working on Pinocchio. The other thing that I forgot to mention last time is that if you go here to the very bottom of the feed, there's actually a lot of documentation for this, which is really nice because a lot of these new tools don't have documentation. So you can read a lot about every option and every knob. It's actually very well populated. Just know that there is also a Discord server. So you can also hop on the Discord and there's a bunch of people there, and actually the developers are actually very on top of things. So I even had a few questions, and within minutes, I was always getting an answer. So really, really nice place if it's something you're interested in diving in and maybe you don't have where to ask a question, this is the place to do that. Okay, so we have the GitHub, we have documentation, and we have the Discord. Another thing I wanted to cover before I dive in is the fact that I am no longer running FaceFusion on Pinocchio. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but like I said, ever since the other video launched, the developer reached out and he gave me access to his Buy Me a Coffee. This is a site, something like Patreon, where you can just pay and you have access to some things. And the reason why this was helpful to me was because ever since he saw my video, he now gives you access to actually having a mask exporter for the face, which I thought was a thing that you really desperately needed if it's something that we eventually wanted to use in production. So the way the Buy Me a Coffee works is you pay membership like you would for Patreon, right? So in this case, the base one is $20 a month. You can just pay for 1 month, and then you have access to everything. And that is at the moment the only way you can get the mask exporter processor. So just know that if you want to grab that mask exporter, this is the only way. So once you pay that, even though it says here $10, you see here it says free for members. Okay, so you have that. And then the other reason why this is also helpful if you want to ditch the Pinocchio and just do a standalone installation on Windows is that you also have the Windows installer. So you see here is also, even though it says $20, it says free for members. So it looks like you can just write out buy it instead of paying for the membership. But it's 20 for the Windows installer, 10 for the mask exporter, so you might as well just pay the 1 month membership and grab everything you need. The neat thing is that there's also a Mac installer, but even for members, some of these other tools have a price attached to them, so just keep that in mind. One thing to keep in mind is that the only reason why I'm using the Windows installer is because I got access to it, right? So if it's something that you don't want to pay for it, which is fair enough, you can just install it via the GitHub, right? So just follow the instructions and you should be up and running. Again, you can always just ask for help in the Discord if you like. So the only thing that is truly gated here, because the FaceFusion installer provides the same as the GitHub installation, the only thing that is gated is the mask exporter. So just know that, unfortunately, at the moment, this is the only way to get it. But if it's something you don't like, then you can just still grab everything for free from the GitHub. All right, so I'm now in FaceFusion. But before I begin, there was just one more thing I wanted to cover. Because I cover a lot of new projects, machine learning projects that sometimes have different licensing, or we don't really know if it's things we can use in production, which I always tell you, like, just make sure that you check yourself. I don't want to make any promises because things can change, new discoveries can be made. So just make sure that you do your homework if it's something you wanna use in production, right? However, a lot of people reach out and say, oh, but this is something that we can't use, the licensing is not open, or it's just not safe, or whatever the reason is. The reason why I cover these videos or these tools is because I think it's important for us to be exposed to what's out there. It doesn't mean that you will necessarily use this in the next production you'll have, but having the knowledge of what is out there is prepping you for what comes in the next months or years, right? So things are moving incredibly fast. So I just think it's important that people know what's out there. People are exposed instead of just being surprised down the line 6 months and then, maybe the people around you know more than you. It's just a matter of just being curious, which is what I like to be when it comes to this stuff. Just being curious, being interested, seeing where it breaks, seeing what's possible. Because maybe in 6 months, something that you were looking at months ago is something that's available for you to use now. So I just wanted to say that as a preface for, I guess, kind of a blanket statement for most of my videos that cover this kind of tool. Um, Make sure you do your homework, but definitely stay curious. I think it'll pay off in the future. All right, so diving in, the first thing I wanted to cover was the processors, right? So last time when I covered this, I said it was a shame that you would do the face swap and then you would do the face enhancer and then you would do the live portrait, which is the expression restorer. But then it was kind of a waste because the enhancer happened before the live portrait. And as you know, live portrait has a very small output, something like 128 by 128 or 256 by 256. It's just a very small patch of the face. So I figured, it'd be nice if the enhancer happened at the end, but I just couldn't get it to work that time. It happens to be the case that the processor work in the order you select them, right? So if you're always going to do face swapper first, right? So if you do expression restore then, right, that means that when the process is rendering down here, what it'll do is it'll do the face swap, then it'll do the expression restore, and then finally anything else you add, like let's say the face enhancer, right? So I guess what I was doing before was I was selecting in the other direction, and I didn't know that these steps happened in the order you selected them, because I guess the UI doesn't tell you that. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you take the steps in the order that you think are the most efficient or that will produce the best result, right? So in this case, you want to do the face swap, and then you want to do the expression restore, which again is driven by live portrait. And then finally, you want to do the face enhancer, right? So that'll do face swap, then apply the animation to the face, and then upscale that result. So obviously that was a big drawback that I mentioned last time around. It's actually it's not the case. It's just a matter of selecting the processors in the correct order. So let me just go here and populate this just quickly, just so we have something. And like I said, we'll hop onto Nuke in a bit. So I'm just going to throw, again, let's just throw a face here and the video, right? So a couple more things I wanted to cover. Which I've actually mentioned a lot of this to the developer. So the preview window, unfortunately, is only a quarter res, which is why it looks so crunchy and just low res. I mentioned it would be very nice, especially because you have to wait for these things to cook. Even though it's fairly quick, it would just be very nice if we had a high quality preview. So hopefully that's something that comes in the future. But at the moment, that's what we have. So just know that what you're looking at is only a quarter of the res, right? The other thing that I wanted to cover is the mask exporter, right? So I covered how you can grab the mask exporter. The mask exporter, unfortunately, it's paywalled, but it is an option if you want to grab it, and it's a one-time payment, so it's not too bad. So it's here now, added in the mask exporter as a processor. Keep in mind that you will not have that if you go through the GitHub or the Pinocchio and you're not paying and you didn't pay for the membership. So that's just how it goes. So I'm going to select mask exporter just so you can see what it does now, right? And what you'll see in a second is that it's actually giving you a mask of that output, right? So by default, it'll give you just the square of where that face is being replaced. And I'm going to turn this off for a second just so you can see head is tilted, which is why the square is tilted, right? So I'm going to turn that back on. So if we check the mask exporter options here, we have by default the box, right? So probably what you want to do is switch to occlusion, and that'll give you something that makes a lot more sense, right? The nice thing is that you also have options to, if we go to region here, right, you can then start selecting or deselecting anything you don't want a mask for. So you can, render masks to your heart's desire and have as much control as you like. So let's say we turn off the mouth. So now we have a mask that is actually punching a hole in the mouth. Let's say we want to get rid of the eyes for some reason. So there you go. I think this is all pretty neat. Having the option of control at the end of the day, right? Which is what we like as compositors or VFX artists. So okay, so that's the mask exporter. So it's just very straightforward. Unfortunately, even though you see here that I've selected different processors, right? Because I've selected the mask exporter at the end, it's kind of just disabling everything else, right? Because the mask exporter will always render this white and black image. So it doesn't really matter in this case. You could just turn off the face enhancer, and I guess the expression restorer is probably important just because it might change the shape. So make sure that if you're going to do the mask exporter, you keep the expression restorer on. So that's kind of it for the mask exporter. And then the last couple of things I wanted to cover is the fact that you can actually, and this is very interesting, even though I didn't have, I don't want to say great results, I want to say better results. You can actually on the sources here, you can bring in more than one image. So if you remember in my previous video, I would just like I did now, I'd always just drop in one image. But the neat thing is that you can actually bring in, let's say, multiple of the same person, right? So you see now we have a list up here of sources, right? So we don't have just the one, we have 3 of the same person. And when talking to the developer, he said that the way this works is that theoretically it can produce a better output. I didn't find that to be the case, but it just slightly varied. So I think if I were going to do this, I'd probably, like I did last time in my video, I'd cook a bunch of different versions with single image, multi-image, and just see what sticks and see what produces a better result. Just keep in mind that he said that the way this works is that um, it'll create some sort of an average of the images of all of the key features, right? So maybe it does help in some examples. And then the other thing he mentioned is that you probably don't want to go past 6 or 8 images. Past there, it's really diminishing returns. So just keep that in mind. So I think it's a cool thing to know now that you can add multiple images. So the last thing I wanted to cover here was actually something that I didn't cover last time around, just because I was doing tests and I didn't really need to batch a bunch of renders. But you actually can, which is really nice. You can just queue a bunch of jobs and then you can just walk away and let them cook and then come back when you're ready. So if you go here at the bottom where it says UI workflow, it's set to instant runner, which means that you have the start button, and anything you have set up at the top, you can just click start and it'll cook, right? So it's very straightforward. However, you can just switch this to job manager, right? And you'll get a default action here, which is job create. So let's go ahead and call this face swap 01. So if you click apply, you'll get a result here in the terminal saying that that job was now created. It'll switch now to add step. So the step means that anything we have up here is going to be added to that job, because we've only just created an empty job, right? Now we have to give it what that job needs to do. So that's what the step is. So let's say we are happy with what we have up there. We can just say apply, and now you can say step added to job. And now finally, we can just switch this to job submit, right? And then you can just say, I want to submit this job, because you can, like I said, you can just create many jobs and then just switch between them. So let's say we want to submit face swap 01, click apply. And then now you see face swap 01 has now been submitted. So now you switch from manager to runner, and then you say job run, and I want to run my job face swap 01. So if I click start, it'll just cook every single step that I added on that job. So again, you can just switch back here to manager, and then instead of create, you want to say add step, and then maybe here you wanted to do something different. So instead of just the expression restore, we actually want to do the mask exporter, right? So we let that preview cook for a second, and we want the occlusion instead of the box. And then now here we go down here again, and now we add the step to the to that job we want, and then that way, once you add all the steps you need, you can again you can just go back into runner, and then anything you've any steps you added to your jobs will just be queued one after the other, and then you come back and everything's nice and rendered. All right, so that does it for the new information I want to share with you in terms of FaceFusion. So the next step is I want to go over to Nuke and show you the template that I've prepared that I'm going to be sharing with you so that you can grab your outputs from FaceFusion and make them a lot better, just spending a bit of comp time. Okay, here's the template I've prepared. And the reason why I wanted to do this is I wanted to see how far I could push this in making the result better. And the result was actually something that I was very happy with. So I figured I'd share it with you guys, and I'm going to go ahead and walk you through what I've done here. And again, you can just grab this from the description of the video. So at the very first place you want to go to is here, the plate box. So what I have here is because I obviously Nuke doesn't really like MP4s or MOVs or any other format that isn't image sequences. I've gone ahead and I've rendered every single output into a PNG sequence. And again, you can from FaceFusion render ProRes, I believe, so that's probably what you want to do. But just because this was a test, I've gone ahead and rendered everything MP4. So I've gone ahead and turned those MP4s into PNGs just so that it's easier to work with. And I did the same for the beauty outputs of FaceFusion as well as the FaceFusion mat, right? So that's what's happening in each one of these boxes, right? So we have that. So I'm starting here from the plate. That's all that's happening. Then we move on to the FaceFusion Beauty. And the reason why I have two versions here is that you'll see one is called single and the other is called multi. And this is what I was saying, where you could use multiple images in FaceFusion instead of the one. Again, I tested it not a few different times, and I didn't really get something that was substantially better, but it was different enough that I figured it was interesting just to look at the both results. And you can see here, if I toggle between these two results, this is single and this is multi. Not a lot of difference, but I guess it's worth running, right? So these are, these generations are not don't take a terrible long time to cook, so might as well just rendering, and then you can make up your mind later. So that's why I have two. And then again, I've gone ahead and I turned those into PNG sequences for both the default and the multi-image, right? But I think in the end, I like the single one better. I don't know, dealer's choice. So then move on to the Fusion, to the FaceFusion matte output, and this is where we get that that matte of the area that is being extracted or replaced. And one thing to keep in mind is that you definitely want to render this in 16-bit, and I'll show you why in a second. So if you just render this out as a PNG sequence and don't think about it and just keep it at 8-bit, what you'll find is that if I gamma down here, what you'll see is that you get a lot of compression artifacts. Whereas if we look at the 16-bit one, it's a bit cleaner, right? Keep in mind there's like a lot of uh, it's not the nicest thing to look at when it looks like this. So I have treated it as we go down in the template. So just make sure you do render at 16-bit just so that you get a bit of a cleaner result. So once you have that, let's go back to our gamma of 1. Again, I say here you want to make sure that your mask doesn't have any holes. It shouldn't have any mask, but I noticed that it does sometimes. So I made an annotation here for myself. If you go to frame 48, right, it looks like the mat is great. However, if you expose down, actually, sorry, gamma down, if you gamma down, what you'll see is that we actually have a big hole. And if we sample the mat anywhere, let's say here where it looks nice and solid, what you'll quickly see here is that no value is 1, right? And we want our mats to be 100% opaque. So even though it's close, we want to push it in that direction. And then same with areas like this, and more so with areas like this. If I go ahead and sample, this is you know, not even close to 1. So it's like 0.93, 0.92, you'll see. So definitely make sure that when you get that output, you gamma down aggressively so that you see all the issues with your mat. So if you need to patch something by hand, you can just quickly see where the issue is. So I'm going to go back to gamma 1, and just because I know what I was dealing with, because I was looking through here, I've gone ahead and I've just adjusted the white point just so that I get a nice mat that is white. So if I look here, right, this is the before and after. So you definitely want to do something like that. So I'm going to go back and reset all my sliders here. And then the next thing on the tree here is you want to turn that, because this is an output that has only RGB. You want to turn that into an alpha channel. So with an expression node, you can just use whatever really. I've just set it to so that the R is an alpha, but you can just do it with a shuffle node. So that's what that expression node is doing, and that's nicely labeled for you. The other thing I have here is a mat check, right? So because now we have that turned into an alpha channel, you can just view here, and if you play this back, you can get a preview of any potential issues or holes, or anything else that's happening to your mat. So this is just a place for you to check what's going on. So again, nothing to render out. This is just for you to QC your work as you're going down the tree. Next, the mat treatment. So the reason why I have this here, a lot of people might know the Kichu tool. It's something that's been around for a very long time, I believe Shake Days, and I use it quite a lot. What I'm doing here is I'm grabbing that alpha. So I'll just add a dot here so that we can compare. So I'm looking at the alpha channel here, and what I'm doing is I'm crunching it in a bit just so it's a bit smaller, and then I'm also softening it. So you see I have a chew of -15 and a soften of 20, and that just makes it so that the edges are a bit nicer and softer, and I have actually now controlled the edge, because if we look at what comes out is actually very sharp, right? Because we had to treat it through a grade before. So now with that Kichu, we're getting something that's nice and soft, and it's actually a bit tighter on the face. So it actually helps us, because you'll see in a second why this is important. If we so then that mat goes into a copy. So we are now applying to the beauty. We are giving it that alpha channel. So originally we had this with no alpha channel, and now we have this where we were applying that mask. So we have controlled way of extracting that face and applying it to the original video. So if you look at the result here from our beauty output, you'll see that things like this are very common, right? Where we have an edge where the face patch meets the original face, right? And we have a bit of a darkness there. It looks like we even see some of the eyebrow of the original video. So if I compare that to our plate, our original video, what you'll see is that obviously we don't have those issues, right? And that's why in my matte treatment I am contracting it a bit and softening it so that hopefully we get less issues or no issues at all, which you'll see in a second why it was so important. So going back here to our copy, I'm adding that alpha channel to the FaceFusion output after the mat's been treated. So the next thing, like I said, is the interpolation. So the interpolation is very important because a lot of these tools are not temporally consistent. And I guess the important one here is the upscaler, right? So the upscaler that FaceFusion uses, or any upscaler, I guess, in terms of these kind of tools, they're not meant to be temporally consistent. So what happens is that it's just upscaling every frame as if it were on an island. It doesn't care what comes before or after, so they might vary a little bit. So what I do here is I slice the frame count in half like I did in my original video, and then I reinterpolate it with, in this case, I'm using Rife, which is just my favorite. Again, if you want to see what Rife can do, I have a video about it from a few months ago. I'll post a video so you can go ahead and watch it. So what I'm doing here is I'm grabbing these original 120 frames and I'm retiming them so that we go from that 1 to 120, and now the output is going to be 1 to 60. So we're increasing it at a speed of 2. Make sure you filter it to none, because if you filter it to nearest, there will be a bit of an offset in time, just an offset of 1 frame. So make sure you set it to none. So now that you have that, that goes through Rife, and what Rife is doing here is it takes that 1 through 60 input, and you're going to be adding keyframes to the frame. So if we go here to the first frame, right, you'll see that we have a frame of 1, so the keyframe for frame 1, and then on the 119th we have a keyframe for frame 60. So that's essentially going back on the retime we did from 1 to 120 and then to 60 will then be reinterpolated into 120 frames again. And just because of how Rife works or how this is set up, I have a switch here that at the very last frame, so for the 120, it just switches back to the original just because it doesn't need a retime at that point. It's just restoring the original frame. So that's what this is doing. That's how the interpolation is working. Once you have that done, you definitely want to pre-comp because you probably don't want to keep that Rife live because it's a bit memory intensive. So just to keep things speedy, I've added a pre-comp here, and again I have my original and multi-image outputs. So that's what we have here. And then what I have here is just a backdrop for you to do your color correction. So you can just grab it, and I've gone ahead and I've color corrected and softened it a bit, so just so that it gets closer to the original. So let me just grab here the original so you can see it. So this is just so that we get a bit closer, right, in terms of color. Because if you compare the original with the plate, yeah, it's just different worlds when it comes to color, right? Whereas if we look at my color corrections versus the plate, you'll see we're getting a bit closer, right? So that's what that's doing there. And then finally, what you want to go ahead and do is add motion blur, right? And something I've covered in other of my videos, the importance of motion blur. Motion blur is very important because the problem with this face replacement is that it doesn't really introduce motion blur for any extra motion that the face might have. It's just trying to put that sticker on the face, if you will. So what I'm doing here is I've added a Chronos, right? And I've kept it, basically default. Make sure that the input range matches the input range of the pre-comp you've done here at the top. And then, so that would be 1 to 120 in my case. I kept output speed at 1, and then just make sure that you play around with your vector detail and strength. I think 0.5 is usually a pretty good sweet spot. And then just add shutter samples. So what you'll get is, if you go to a good frame, like let's say frame 16, like I have here in my annotation, is it frame 16? If I look at the plate, right, what you'll see is that this frame actually has quite a bit of motion blur because her head is moving downwards, right? So that if we look at the result from FaceFusion, it doesn't really have any of that motion blur. It's just sharp on all frames, right? Which is why it's important to just add some of that back so we get a bit of realism. So now we look at the Chronos here. You see we go from this to this. So you see that motion blur, even though it's a little bit, it adds that feel that you can sometimes you can't tell when something looks off. This is just to fight that, right? So it should look right now. So now we have our Chronos output, and then you finally want to pre-mold that that image through the mat we created at the top. So now with that mat, because you probably don't want to keep the rest of the generation, that's why the mask export is so important, because now we just want that patch. We don't care of all the other stuff. We don't want to hit our videos with any extra processing or compression, which is why you want to extract and treat as little as possible. So that's why we have our mat extracted here. So we go to our original video here, and now we just over our face patch over the original, right? So we go from that to that. So that's I guess the intent of the template, right? Very straightforward, but hopefully it'll give you a starting point of where saving you some time getting things up and running. Finally, I just keep I keep channels just RGB, just so we get rid of anything else that we don't need, and then we finally just write out the output. Looking at the results now, I have a contact sheet here where I have the original plate, I have the FaceFusion comped output, and I have just a default FaceFusion output. What you'll see is that because we have now the option of having a mat, you can fix issues like where those seams live and how they behave, right? So if we look at the FaceFusion output by default, we have, like I said before, those lines, and maybe the hairline wasn't quite right. So just by having access to that mat, it just makes things much easier to work with. So Now, if I have a contact sheet here of all side by side, so we have our original, we have our plate, which actually looking at it again, maybe my motion blur is a bit on the higher side than it should be, and then we have our FaceFusion raw. So this is, I think it's a market improvement. If you look at the black levels, if you look at, there's just a lot of things that you can control that you can extract the face. So hopefully this helps you out, and this, explains a lot more of the possibilities that you can have with FaceFusion and how a template like this one can help you improve your results. Yeah, that's going to do it for me today. Hopefully this helps you. And again, I love the discussions behind videos like this where there's just so much to learn. So anything new or any mistakes I made, please let me know. I'd love to keep learning. And like I said before, stay curious.